Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Munir Musa, and I am the volunteer director of Global Forum for Teacher Educators. This forum is working in over 65 countries to promote human rights education. Today, we are going to discuss about an important topic of mental health, and it's an honor for me to welcome esteemed scholars, Karen Wagner. Hello, Karen.
Good morning.
Good morning. Jennifer Hancock,
Hello, everyone.
Vimal Resh Ramasamy,
Good morning, everyone.
Professor Merrick,
Good morning.
and Terry.
Good morning.
Thanks to all of you for accepting my invitation. It's always good to have you at Global Forum for Teacher Educators. So today we are going to talk about very important topic that is considered as a stigma in many societies. Um, in the topic, you have read that I have quoted silence and violence because there are many young people who are facing depression and they go for silence. For example, they are depressed, they are not sharing their viewpoints with other people. At the same time, we'll find other young people who are violent, who are intolerant. So, silence and violence are two opposite ways where mental health issues can take young people. So, today, I would like to ask the first question to Karen Wagner. Karen, as you know, that mental health challenges are growing among young people across the world. It's not about young people, although it's the problem for everyone. But young people are the most affected one with mental health issues. So, what, in your views, could be the actual reason behind it?
Wow, it is a great question. We really need to dig in deep to this. And although mental health issues have been part of humanity since the beginning of humanity, I think we are starting to see this shift. And I'm going to give you some statistics of things that I looked up through peer research. And this is what I truly believe because I work with so many parents that are experiencing this, and we see this in our schools as well. But let's take it back to here. In 2007, Apple introduced the iPhone. In 2010, Samsung introduced their Galaxy. Since the release of smartphones, and I'm reading from the statistics because I want to get them correct, mental health concerns increased in children and young adults. Depression alone increased 52%. 52% from 2005, before the introduction of the smartphones. This is just a 2017, and 63% in young adults. So adolescents and even higher in young adults. Older adults, my age maybe, we're not affected by that, but the younger students were. In 2012 to 2015, depression increased in boys by 21%, 50% in our young girls. By 2015, 92% of teens and young adults owned a smartphone. 92% by 2015 of our young adults owned a smartphone. And as the smartphone use increased, so did depression symptoms. In 2017, there was a study between 8th and 12th graders found that high levels of depression symptoms were up 33% from 2010 to 2015. Suicide rates in girls of this age was up 65%. 65%. Child suicide rates were up 150%, and self-harm in our girls from the ages of 10 to 15 nearly tripled. All of this takes us back to social media. 8th graders spending over 10 hours a week. 10 hours a week. All right. So that's a little over an hour a day. We all know that these kids are on social media more than an hour a day, are 56% more likely to report being unhappy compared to those who spend less time on social media. And so I don't want to. Social media is here. It's real. It's going to happen. But for my perspective, where I come from as parents, we need to limit that time that our kids are first introduced, because their brains are not ready for this, and how we limit the time on that. There are tools. Light has a smartphone that you don't get social media on, Gab wireless. And so I just want to, not only the symptoms, but what are the solutions? And I really feel the root, we just need to dial it back to the home as parents, that we can't get torn into the peer pressure of what everybody else had, because this is affecting our children. So if I were really to take a look back as to what are the actual reasons, when I went back to look deep into the data, this is what I found. I'm not making this up. These are the real statistics.
That's true.
Okay, so Jennifer, would you like to shed light on the same question?
Sure. I look at this a little bit differently. Same problems, obviously, that the numbers are going up exactly for the reasons Karen talks about. But, we live in kind of unprecedented times, right? We're way more connected than we used to be. We have way more knowledge than we used to have. We're in the middle of a pandemic, for goodness sake. We've got climate change issues, threats of violence. While there's less war than there used to be, there's still war all over the globe. And living with the thought of mortality is not exactly happiness conducive, right? Like if you're constantly worried that if I go to the store, I'm going to get shot, or if I go to school, I'm going to get shot, or I'm not going to, like, what's the point, because the world's going to end with climate change in 15 years by the time I'm an adult. This is not good for people's mental health. I know, I'm an adult, right? And I still have fight or flight going on because of what is going on with the world. So I don't think we should be surprised that our kids are also dealing with it, but without, the benefit of experience that the adults have. I think another thing on the plus side, people are talking about mental health without stigma in a way that they never did when I was a child, right? It's more okay to talk about, gender issues, right? The anger, like when I was a kid and I couldn't play sports because I don't want to age myself, but I wasn't allowed to play sports as a child in the US because the laws hadn't been written that allowed me to. I wanted to be a boy, not because I had gender dysphoria, right? But I just wanted to play soccer, right? And there was no way to talk about that. I couldn't go to my parents and say, how do I become a boy so I can play soccer? I didn't have the tools to be able to ask that. But now kids are able to ask these questions. Most kids, not everybody, right? And it's less stigmatized, and they can talk to each other about it more than they used to be able to do, partially because of social media. So to me, it's a double-edged sword. But I think the third thing that we should look at is poverty, right? There's growing research that poverty and income inequality not just creates stress, but it rewires the brain in fundamental ways. And, if you don't have the nutrients for your brain to grow properly, how can we expect that to not have an impact on the future adult? Right. So I think there's a whole bunch of issues we need to kind of take in. But I think if we just looked at the pandemic and climate change and the violence around us that we're now way more aware of, and kids are way more aware of, then there's no, of course, people are going to be more stressed. Mental health issues are going to result from that.
Raish, what are your views?
I think, I have to say I concur with Karen. As a therapist, I work with young people, and I found that social media, the misuse and overuse, very unhealthy because it renders unhealthy expectations of the world. And lots of these young people are seeing the world through a very different lens to how I saw the world. And that in itself creates some very unhealthy patterns of thoughts and behaviors. So I think, I concur with Karen in the sense that I think social media among young people should be, I would say, not watched or helicoptered, but I think should not be used in I suppose not be used in abundance.
Yeah.
Because I think it can be quite detrimental if it goes the wrong way.
Professor Merrick?
Yeah, my distinguished colleagues have stolen my thunder somewhat because I immediately thought social media, that's been covered, world affairs, that's obviously a problem. There are so many very, very visual problems. Children now, school children, have access to these visual problems, and they're very scary. But I also thought of sports, only because my grandson today had a state fencing championship, and it put a lot of pressure on him because the winners are the popular kids at school. And he's only 11, but he had felt enormous pressure. He did very well, by the way. Also, from my perspective, as a university lecturer and also now teaching mind mapping and techniques like that. I find all students, children, PhD candidates, all of them are very stressed from the amount of work they need to do, the amount of things that they need to remember. So I'm very pleased that, there's such positiveness out there to help people like this. Especially I work with children who are on the spectrum as well, and try and help their lives. It won't fix anything, but it'll just be another tool in their toolbox.
Yes.
Yeah. Terry, your viewpoints?
All right, so my viewpoints are a lot around health. I am a 3-time cancer survivor, and when I came out of my third cancer, where I almost passed away, I almost died, I really started looking at the predictors of longevity. And what I found was social integration is the number one predictor of longevity. And our children are not connecting face to face. So yes, they're connecting on social media, but that's not where they need to be connecting. They need to be connecting in person. They need to be, doing sports and having fun together. And so that when I speak a lot about, the connectiveness of social integration, but I also work with adults who have childhood trauma, and most of the trauma is around physical and sexual abuse. And they grow up to have unworthiness issues, self-love issues, and they stay silent. So I have young women, when I speak, come up to me after speaking, young women who tell me that they were sexually abused as a child and they stayed in silence until they told me. And this has happened, I can't even tell you how many times. So I think, isolation, the lack of social integration, and the lack of self-love.
Very important, and I personally believe that it's very important for us to teach young people about exploring the personal identities, who they are, about their identity relations with others, their relations with friends, their relations with family members. At the same time, it's also very important to teach young people about digital literacy. That's also very important. If we will just give them gadgets in hand, it does not mean that they will be using it safely. But if they have digital literacy, certainly they will be able to know how to use it accurately, properly, and contextually. Um, the second question is, what are the common issues at school, college, or university level that affect the well-being of young people? Jennifer, would you like to break the ice?
Sure. And at first I want to go back to what Terry just said. Like, when I think about my friends that have, real mental health issues, almost all of them have assault in their background, whether it was a parent who assaulted them or one of their, first romantic relationships that assaulted them or whatever. Almost all of them have some sort of abuse in their background that kind of exacerbate their ability, and negatively impact their ability to function with normal everyday stresses, right? That everybody has to deal with. So getting to the question that Munir just asked, what are the common issues? I think Terry's right that social networks and social inclusion is probably key to everything, right? It's humans are a tribal species, right? If we are not part of a tribe, or we get expelled from a tribe, our limbic brain, our primitive brain views that as a death sentence. It's a fight or flight situation. It is a mortal threat to be socially excluded. And so the threat of that through bullying and exclusion, which happens at all levels of society, it's a human thing that we do, which is unfortunate, but it creates the threat of exclusion or actual exclusion. And that creates a lack of security, a lack of trust, a lack of social network that we can rely on. And I think it might just be that this is a lot of what I do, right? I help people learn how to stop bullying using behavioral modification techniques. So this is what's coming out at me all the time. But it does underline everything we're going to talk, like we talk about, whether we're talking about diversity and inclusion in the workplace and equity issues, whether we're talking about kids with on the spectrum or with some sort of disability. How do we create inclusion and reduce exclusion through the form of bullying and harassment, which really impacts people's sense of security, and that has cascading impacts throughout all of their mental health, whatever the mental health issue is, it's going to exacerbate it multiple times. So that's what I kind of look at, is how do we actually create inclusion? And I think back to my son, right? He has a disability. He couldn't run the way other kids run. So we would have to help the other kids learn how to include him so that he could play sports with them. And how do we help kids learn how to actively include people who are different than them and are differently able than them or have issues on the spectrum, which are like superpowers in some ways, but people can't see them, right? So how do we help people create that inclusion so that people have that sense of security and the social networks they need to maintain mental health?
Yeah. Raish?
I was going to just expand from Jennifer's comments. I think as an autistic person, she's so right. There is a lack of inclusion in terms of embracing diversity in its entirety. Most often it's all so much based on educational attainments, but there's more to that in life. So as a lecturer who has anxiety and depression, I most often, talk about these sorts of stories in my classes because whilst I understand it's important to come and learn and grow, but also, what's also important is we're working with human subjects, not objects as well. Let's take into account people's emotions, intentions, motivations, all those sorts of things. I think it makes it a much more holistic approach if we can account for all these different aspects of humanity.
Professor Merrick?
Yeah, the information that I can share with you is anecdotal from my experiences at university and teaching. Problems facing students these days is lack of supervision, for example, in the classroom. Job availability is a big problem, as are financial pressures to pay for their education, to stay well during their education and be able to pay for it. But there is a more in-depth subject that we don't have time for today. But if I can just explain a couple of things. The way students take notes, for example, is so bad. It is so poorly taught, the way we take notes. We will write our notes with a pen or on a computer. It's the worst thing we can do, and it creates a lot of problems for students. Poor revision habits are the same. These can be turned around, but they're a common problem in schools. Procrastination is a big problem. I'll study tonight. No, I'll do it tomorrow. I couldn't be bothered. I want to go for a walk or go out with my friends. And procrastination is a big problem because we teach our students to do things in a difficult way. As Tony Bazan once said to me, he said, I realized that I was ostensibly teaching myself to be stupid. And that's a really bold statement to say. But in effect, he was right. Yeah. And the last thing, expanding workload. Workload is very, very high. And I think that does affect the well-being of students quite a lot. And if we approach it differently, which I do, it can be much more easily handled, and the mental health of our students will improve quite a lot.
Terry, would you like to add something to the discussion?
Sure. Well, I'm a mother of 4 and a grandmother to 8. So I have a lot of kids in school. I have one child who is at university. He's 20 years old. And, I went to him and got his input too. We try as parents to listen to him, well, to all of our children, our grandchildren. And, he said, I mean, he's really doing well in school. He's traveling abroad. But he said there's so much pressure on kids today to conform to a certain success. And he looks at both of his parents. His father has a PhD in statistics. I was a very successful sales leader, and he's kind of like, oh gosh, I gotta be that successful. Well, he doesn't feel that way, but he said many kids do. And he came from a standpoint that a lot of parents put a ton of pressure on these kids to perform, and that's just giving them, it might be making them more lackadaisical, because when you have an overbearing amount of pressure on you, you shut down. He also mentioned lack of sleep, and economic. A lot of these kids are paying for their education. They don't have the resources, the financial resources to pay for their own education. So he was just came from a standpoint of there's a lot of pressure on these kids, and they're acting out as a result.
Yes.
Yes, Karen, would you like to expand the discussion?
Yeah, there's so many, coming in last, I think a lot of excellent points have been made, but a couple of the notes that I had made it within the last couple of years with the pandemic, having to move kids, especially what I see with parenting tweens and teens, from an in-person model to a virtual model was crushing for that time of their life. That's where they're developing their independence, their social status, all those things. And they went from being with people in the building to sitting like we're doing now. But we're adults, we can handle this. But their brain development at that point, it was just the time, it was like a perfect storm. It was not good for them. So the missing of the meaningful relationships, at this time. Now, there are still virtual learning going on. I do it all the time as well. But I found even with my kids in school, as they were transitioning to virtual models, it doesn't work for everyone. And some of our kids were just getting lost in that. And there was nowhere to go. There was nowhere to go. We had 2 years of this. I don't think we will fully understand the impact for this generation of what has happened. And I think we're starting to see it now. But in the moment when we were in a crisis, we just laid down the boom, and everybody had to deal with it. And I think we're still dealing with the outcomes of that. Unrealistic views of other people's lives was another thing I put down. As some of you were saying, just the competition and again, social media leads into that. You see these people have these wonderful lives, which isn't always true, but in their minds, that's what they see, that's what they believe. So it's those unrealistic views of what other people's lives are that puts the peer pressure on them to feel as though they need to have this as well. And it's always that trying to take it up a notch to feel as though they can compete with this, especially when it comes to social media. So either living up to other people's expectations. And in the parent coaching space where I am, parents were really struggling with their kids not doing well in school, which all that was doing was putting more pressure on the student for performance rather than getting to the root, because I'm all about getting to the root cause, the why, because all we see here is the outward behavior of an inward deficit, okay? There's an inward motive and drive to the external behavior, and we want to address the external behavior, but if we don't get to the why, nothing changes. So now, and then back on the personalities, because that's where I come from. Some kids are just very hard on themselves, period. Yeah. That's just who they are. They're perfectionists. And so they're driving to try and compete with this in a very competitive world. And so these are some of the things that I felt that were happening at that school and university level that can really affect the anxiety. And when you don't measure up, the depression, that becomes that slippery slope when we don't address those feelings and emotions and teach our students how to cope with the feelings and emotions that they have before they get to the deeper levels that we have a difficult time pulling them out. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember in 2019, I published 2 books. One is Face of Depression, and second is Silent Stream. First book is related to the photographs of people depicting how they are going through all these ordeals. And the second one is related to stories. What I got from all 2 books is that the only person who is going through depression knows what he is going through or she is going through. Not any other person know about all these ordeals. So, Vesh, as you are working as an academician, you are also a therapist, social counselor. I just want to ask you that is academia playing an active role to address mental health issues? If yes, how? If no, why not?
Okay, you see, I've worked in 4 different institutions, and so from my own personal opinion, the answer is no. But as an academic, yes, I am. So I'll tell you more. So I lecture in the grad dip of counseling, the bachelor's of counseling, and the master's of counseling and psychotherapy. And one of the things that I do in my classes is I deploy a storied approach to teaching and learning. It's important. So as a trained narrative inquirer, I think it's so important to share our stories and to use our stories to create meaning, purpose, context, content, and also how we frame different topics and discourses. So one of the things that I do in my classes is I share my own lived experiences of anxiety and depression with my students quite transparently. And it's really helped to bridge that theory and practice gap, because most often they leave my classrooms feeling empowered, and also they've learned information in a very pragmatic way. Now, I value books, but I'm not a textbook professional either as well. I think what's more important is how can I take that knowledge and apply it in everyday life. That to me is what makes a complete counselor or psychologist, not one that just reads from the book like a parrot. So I think I suppose for me personally, in terms of my contributions to really share my lived experiences, I would also encourage more academics to share their stories, because those stories are important and impactful, and they create meaning and they create change as well.
Yeah, it's so true because I'm also using the same thing with my university students because I have been teaching for the last 10 years. And what I got to know is that in many universities, we don't have counseling units available. Doesn't matter. It all depends on the teachers to take the ownership and to use different narratives, their own personal narratives and case studies to help students out. Professor Merritt, would you like to shed light on the same topic?
Yes, from my experience is that the answer is yes and no. There's no black and white answer. It's a very grey area. I've seen many wonderful improvements with respect to counselling, to guidance of students. But there are some things I also see that are not addressed well. I'll give you an example. Short-term memory. We all have different lengths of short-term memory. I always laugh when somebody, when I give somebody my phone number, they say, "Hang on, wait. Let me write it down." Not so fast. Short-term memory problem, and other people can just listen and wait 1 or 2 minutes and still write down the number. Many children have short-term memory problems, and there's a tendency to say, "You're not listening. You're not listening to what I'm saying." And some children have a problem that they are listening, but they don't remember a long instruction. So there are many different areas that are being missed out, and using pictures, using stories. That made my heart sing when I heard that just a moment ago. Using stories is something that we do very, very well because we're predisposed to do that. When 10,000 years ago, we have wonderful mental images. We see a saber-toothed tiger, danger. We need to know what to do. It's a form of survival. So using pictures and things like that is a wonderful tool, and that's neglected a little bit as well. So yes, we do many of the typical things that you would expect to provide a safe environment for our students, but some of the deep down issues that some students face are not dealt with as well as they could be, from my experience.
I would like to throw the same question to Terry.
Sure. So, on my experience, and this is really coming from the beginning of COVID, a fellow coach and friend came to me and he said, I'm starting a project to help kids at the college, university level to not feel so isolated. And so we went out all over the country and we found leaders within different universities and colleges who would help us with our project. And the goal was to provide some type of connectivity within each university or college. So we'd start with a pod of maybe 8 kids and they'd meet every week. And these leaders would help us, help us form these pods or these group of kids. And then they would expand. So they'd go out to their friends and say, come join this group. We can't meet face to face, but at least let's try to connect. And here's what we found. And here's what all of these leaders, these students told us. At the university level and the college level, the lack of support around mental health was just not there unless you were severely suicidal. And every one of them told us that. Now, I know things have changed since that time, but it's like what Karen talks about, being isolated, alone, and not having, you're just depressed. You're not suicidal, but you're depressed.
Right.
And these students didn't have a resource to go to. And these were kids, living on campus. And my son, again, gave me some feedback. He said a lot of times this becomes the mental health issue is treated by police. He said, police are called into the school because a kid's violent and they don't look at the underlying factors, the why, as you guys have talked about. Why is this kid violent? Why is this kid threatening to shoot up the school? Why? And it's the police handling it and not the proper mental health resources that they really need.
Yes.
Karen, would you like to add on?
I would. And, I live in Indiana, so I'm here in the States. And many of you know, even globally, some of the tragedies that have happened over the last couple of years. And this is at the school level, not even university level. And there's university stuff, but this is still happening at the younger school level. And so I think that it's starting to bubble up. And as Terry had said, unless you have a severe situation, it's the severe situation gets the attention. We are missing everything that's simmering that could get to that if we don't catch it first. And I think this is bringing light to that. So I am working now with more guidance counselors and school psychologists on how can we bring light to all of this, shed light on this, and taking it into the home, because see, the parents are the first teachers. We are the first ones to be able to see and spending time and identify, and parents need to be aware. Now, unfortunately, all our homes aren't healthy homes where parents are engaged and available. And so there's multiple layers. I don't have all the solutions. All I am saying is, to answer your question, is I am seeing that it is becoming more of a conversation, and my participation in being able to support the schools and the families as to how can parents, number one, understand their kids' personalities. First, let's understand how God has wired these kids, because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And each kids are going to have internal emotional needs. And when that need inside is not met, we experience a disruptive behavior. We tend to want to stay at the disruptive behavior, but if we don't get to the why, just like Terry said, the why, that behavior will continue or escalate until we have a situation, and then we say, well, how did we miss this, right? And so my goal is to educate on how can we start to see and understand, become aware of your child's personality. What are their needs and concerns? Okay, meet those needs, adapt your interactions, and apply the right strategy so that the child feels valued and understood for who they are, not misunderstood for who they're not. Okay. And I've worked with so many parents who say, I thought there was something wrong with my child, but once they understood their personality, it's like, okay, now I get it. This is just how they're wired. How can I be a better parent and support them to be the best they can be according to their design, and not make them feel as though they're failing me as a parent? Because I'm telling you, I'm a blended family, 7 kids, 9 grandbabies, number 10 on the way. So Terry, I'm with you. I see a lot of stuff and a couple generations of it, right? And how it has changed. And as parents, sometimes we can put so much pressure on our kids. So sometimes it's the overpowering control or the helicopter parenting or the hands off, and kids are left floundering. And if we don't give them guidance and support, the world will do it for them. And I can't necessarily say that's going to give us the best outcome. And so the goal really is to get this into the home to help parents better understand so they can better parent, but then also provide those resources at the school so we're all speaking the same language for the kids throughout their lifetime academically. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm always into the partnerships, the family, the school, and the child. How can we provide the best resources to support that child to be the best they can be?
Jennifer, would you like to wrap up this question?
Sure. I agree with everybody, but I'm also like, my thought keeps going to access, right? So I live in Florida and all our schools have guidance counselors, they have school psychologists. So the resources are technically there, but accessing those resources is a function of economics, right? Like I was able to access these things because I was a stay-at-home mom. I had the financial ability to be present and to go to the school and meet people. But my county has a problem. We refer Black kids to police at 3 times the rate of the state of Florida, right? And part of that is both, racism, structural racism, but part of that is also economics, right? People can't, even though there are counselors at the school, if you're working 3 jobs, you can't access them for your kid, right? And we also don't have enough resources, right? My neighbor's kid has ADD. He's involved in the criminal justice system right now because part of it is he can't access help for it as an adult, right? He's self-medicating through drugs, and that causes a whole host of other problems. And even though he was court-ordered to talk to a psychologist within 2 weeks, on this latest thing that happened, he can't get to one for 6 months, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not enough to the partnerships ideally, but the partnerships are dependent on access. Right. So we need more mental health professionals. We need to figure out the barriers to entry for people with economic problems, right? I talked to someone who's like, oh, well, we have food pantries and one-stop centers in the county. I'm like, yeah, the nearest one to me is an 1.5-hour walk from the nearest bus station. And I'm in Florida. Our heat index right today is like 110 degrees. Right. You can't walk an 1.5 hours, right? So yeah, okay, so we have this resource for poor people that poor people can't get to. Right. And so I kind of look at it like we need to fix poverty issues in order to even begin to access the resources where they're needed most.
Good point.
Okay, thank you. So mental health education is one of the most important subject matters, but unfortunately, we can witness that it's not the part of curricula to support the emotional and social well-being of young people. Professor Merritt, what are your viewpoints about this question?
I looked at this question and I feel that I'm not informed well enough to answer this question well. I think my distinguished colleagues would make use of the time I would have spoke to talk about this better than I can. So for this question and the next question, I just do not feel that I am qualified enough or have enough life experience to answer well. So I'm terribly interested to see what everyone else has to say because I'm taking notes.
Okay, this question is now open for everyone. Social and emotional well-being is very important, and I personally believe as a university teacher that we need to introduce a subject like human rights education, mental health education, but it's not the part of curricula. So what could be the reason behind it? Anyone can break the ice.
I will start, Doctor. Sorry, Terry.
No, you go.
Okay, cool. I'm going to approach this question from a cultural standpoint. So I'm Indian, and you see, in my culture, there is no such thing as mental health or mental illness.
Yeah.
Period. It stops right there. So I think from a cultural viewpoint, and if you were to look at Eastern countries, such a topic would not even happen in the first place. It's taboo. So to
Right.
even ask or to require a topic that really endorses social emotional well-being is just me. It's just impossible. So I think, from a cultural viewpoint, there's a lot of barriers still in place, which hinders the well-being of young people.
Okay, Terry?
Well, I agree. Same thing. It's a stigma. It's a stigma to talk about, that you're that you have mental health issues, and that stigma, and so we brush it under the rug, and we don't deal with it. I mean, my parents were old school. They served in World War II. They didn't talk about anything emotional. We were told to stuff our feelings and deal with it. Be strong. When I was raped at gunpoint in my home when I was 24 years old, my dad told me to deal with it, that I was strong. And I think that's generational, and it is cultural, and it just keeps we brush everything under the rug, and so these kids become silent
Yeah.
because it's not acceptable, you know. So I agree.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
cultural,
and there's
the
for example, in
generational.
Pakistan, we have a culture of sharing is shame. If I
Right.
am going through depression, it's not possible for me to express out to share it, even with my family members. It's very difficult
Right.
for us because we are groomed like this. So, Karen, would you like to shed light on into this question, if you would like to?
I would love to, and as a lot of people said, and Rash, I really appreciate what you're saying. The fact is, no one wants to talk about it. No one wanted to talk about it. And, I've been doing this for 20 years, understanding personalities and temperaments and why kids do what they do. And can I tell you how difficult it was to bring this into academia? Why? Because everyone was focused on academic achievement, test scores, academic. No one was looking at the social emotional health of our kids to help them get there, to feel more confident, to meet those emotional needs. And it's now becoming a thing. Thank the Lord, okay, that we're finally opening up Pandora's box and being able to take this there. So it was all about academic achievement. But I also found that, in our schools, we're willing to talk about sexuality and sex and sexual transmitted diseases and contraception, but we're not looking at emotional health. I'm not saying they're not important. I definitely need to talk about it, but why are we not talking about the other stuff? And I think we need to. We need to start introducing that. And the way I look at it, that, from my background in personalities and temperaments, there are personalities that, if needs are not met, can be predispositioned to certain disorders, if you want to say, you know what I mean? You have a perfectionist that could easily go to the, OCD, things have to be perfect for them. Or you have our dominant personality styles that are that dominant, that are the ODD, which, people wanted to label my son. But when I looked at his personality, I said, this is how God wired him. I just need to help him be the best he can be according to his design, not make him feel that he's inferior. Was he a pistol? Oh yeah, no doubt about it, which is why I do what I do today. But to help our kids feel valued and understood for who they are is so important, and we're just not talking about it. And so when I see my daughter who is more reserved and gets in her head, and she really struggled with depression and anxiety, it can happen with how she's wired. So help her become aware that she's predispositioned to this, and give her the coping skills when she starts to feel these things on how to handle it. Nobody wants to talk about it, and we need to open that up to help our kids say that your strength pushed too far can become your weakness or blind spot. And so how do you catch it? How do you cope with that? Because look, I got my quirkies too, you know what I'm saying? And so I had to learn to have boundaries within myself, and what was acceptable, what was not acceptable. And so when we become aware, we can adapt, apply the right strategies, reduce the conflict, and help our kids feel more confident in who they are and not who they're not. So yeah, I just believe that it needs to be in. And look, I've got books. I've presented this in middle schools. I mean, these kids get it. They know they're different. But now they understand why they're different. And they're less offended by someone's personality when they can see life through someone else's lens. And I think that's what we want to do. People look at diversity in so many levels. I look at it from the human perspective, how we're wired, and the diversity. But the value that diversity brings to the world is the beautiful thing.
So true, and young people are truly chasing for the bubble reputations because we are so much materialistic thing, and we are teaching students about science, education, all these things, but not about these important subjects that
Right.
are more important one.
Exactly.
Jennifer, would you like to shed light?
Yeah, absolutely. So I live in the state of Florida, and after the Parkland shooting, our legislator mandated that social and emotional well-being be taught to the children. So all the textbooks in the state of Florida have to include social and emotional well-being. Well, now they're banning math books because they have social and emotional well-being in them, right? So why aren't we teaching these things? Well, the curricula is decided by our legislatures. Like, what are we going to teach and why are we going to teach it? And the method that we're going to teach it is something that's in law, right? But that's kind of problematic in itself because what often gets chosen to be taught is not necessarily scientifically correct. Right. I work in the field of bullying and harassment, both for kids and for adults, and I'm very familiar with the laws that require sexual harassment training in the workplace, right? But the laws are written by lawyers and social workers who don't know what they don't know. And
So
so
true.
they're mandating, they're working on a false assumption that if we just tell a bully that they're doing harm, they will stop. As if magically that'll work. Like in the entire history of humanity, that has not worked. Right. But we have science that tells us what works to get unwanted behavior to stop, but it's not in the laws about what should be taught. Right. So we have this disconnect. I think one of the reasons it's not mandated or not prioritized is because it's not mandated by law that we teach it. And our teachers are so overwhelmed with what is in the law that they do have to teach in a very specific way, right? And there's very little room for how do you have time for the social emotional well-being if it's not mandated that you put it in there, right? And even when it is, it's still controversial. And then what is being taught might be folk wisdom and not science. Like there's a book called 1,000 Brain Theories by Jeff Hawkins, and he talks about what the neocortex does. Right? What the science tells us, how consciousness arises in the neocortex. This should be standard knowledge for everybody, right? But people don't know this. They have all sorts of weird ideas about what consciousness is, let alone what mental health is and how the brain gets things wrong and thinks it's completely right. So all of these things should be in there, but to get them in there is a political act through law, at least in the United States. And then we need to be very careful about what we put in there because we put in a whole bunch of pseudoscience, things that we think are true that aren't true at all. And then we teach them. And then we wonder why kids come up with, and adults have really weird ideas about what reality is. Right. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, so I would like to ask Terry first about some people keep mental health issues within themselves. They are not sharing it with others, while there are others who are too much expressive and take their way out for the positive well-being. So there are many others who are intolerant and participate in intolerant activities. Who is to blame?
Well, first of all, with all due respect, I do not like the word blame because that's all we've been doing. Yeah. Point the finger, point the finger, point the finger, point the finger. That's not going to solve our challenges right now. So, Karen mentioned this, each kid is wired very, very differently. And to understand how they're wired and to strengthen where they're wired, not so great. And I mean, that is first and foremost. And it does start at home. Karen's 100% right. It does start at home. But if you look at some of the homes of these children, I mean, I live in a beautiful community. My children went to some of the best schools in the state of Colorado. Their peers and their friends, I had kids staying at my house because their parents would kick them out on the streets without anything. So, but then you look at the parents and they're wounded and their parents were wounded and their parents were wounded. It's very generational. So it's such a multi-tier, multifaceted issue and problem. And what Karen said about each kid being wired differently, we can't treat each child the same. They all have to be respected for their differences. And I believe also children need to understand compassion and love and empathy. And a lot of them don't. But again, that starts with their parents.
Kevin?
Wow, Terry. Wow. Yes. Big hug right there. It's so true because the parents are the first teachers of our kids. We are molding and modeling from day one that they come into our presence as the gifts that they are. And I know that because this is what I do, that parents bring those generational curses in. And all we bring to parenting, I tell parents, is how God has wired you and how you were parented in the past. And subconsciously, even though we say, I'm not going to do it that way, when we get under stress, we default to that. Why? Because they're the only messages in our head. And so what we really need to do is rewire that. You know, I tell people we need to drag the files to the trash can and empty it and bring in new positive files and new positive approaches and new positive outlooks and new strategies on how to stay connected and communicate with our kids and help them feel valued and appreciated and understood for who they are, and not feel as though, and I'll be the first to test of this as a parent, that my kid's a reflection of me. Okay. Being a little selfish here. So if you look good, you make me look good. So if you don't look good, we're going to have a problem here, you know, and I'm just being honest with you. I'm not going to say that just because this is what I do, that I had it all zipped up. I had a lot of learning to do too. And so my goal really is to be able to transform parenting around the world by helping parents, making these resources available and being able to coach them to understand, as Terry was saying, address those wounds, okay? Those little parenting, those little children wounds that we have from when we were parented that we bring into that relationship. And we're not even realizing we're doing it because that's all we know. We can only do with what we know. When we know more, we can do things differently. And so how do we get that out there? And as Jennifer said, I just want to commend you, Jennifer. You're absolutely right. I work with the schools and they are overwhelmed with knowing how to handle so many more issues than we had a couple decades ago. Mm-hmm. Not saying that this stuff wasn't there, but right now there's so much more. They are completely overwhelmed with how to be able to manage the resources, the limited resources that they have to be able to. So I come from the home perspective that I want to get to the families and get to the homes and nurture the families, because if we can get solid with the families, then the students come in from a different perspective. Terry, you said this was across the board. You had your kids in very good schools, but there was still dysfunction no matter what. It's not always the social. I mean, Jennifer, you make some great points, and that's totally true. But I've seen it in other areas too. Why? Because we're bringing generational curses in. Either we're so busy that we're not paying attention, or we're so hard on our kids because they want them to live up to our expectations. And again, it's crushing the soul and the spirit of the child. And so, you know, I don't think that we didn't talk about it before. I think we're talking about it more now. And I think this is the conversation that we need to have, that some people are expressive with it, and that's why we're communicating it now. Other people have been suppressing it. Resh, I totally understand. There are cultural things where it's not okay. Terry, you came from a generational thing where we just didn't talk about it. We stuffed it, deal with it. You know what I mean? And next thing you know, it's coming out in other areas of our lives that we never would even have thought of. It's just going to rear its ugly head. It just bubbles up until it comes up to something. And then when we really reflect back, we look at things that just were not addressed in those younger years of formation, you know, to be able to do that. So I don't, and I agree. I don't like the word blame, because I think there's a lot of that wanting to do that. This is a reality of what's going on. And so we can't just be pointing fingers. It needs to be a collective, holistic approach to healing the soul.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Jennifer.
So many thoughts right now. The first thing on the question itself is, you know, when I teach people about bullying, I tell them, look, if it's gotten to the point it's violence, it means all the adults around these kids failed these kids.
Yeah.
Right. Because it got to the point that it was violent. Yeah. But the second thing is, you know, sociopathy, psychopathy, and narcissism are real physical things in the brain, and no amount of good parenting is going to fix a psychopath. No amount of good parenting is going to fix a sociopath, right? Someone who just takes pleasure in other people's pain, you can't fix that with good parenting. It's not about the parenting at all. Like and really, when I was listening to you, Karen, I was thinking, I'm not sure that's entirely true, right? Because humans are apes. We learn through aping. We learn through mimicry. We learn by watching what other conspecifics, our peers, are doing and we mimic them to see if it works for us. This is how kids learn. Parents actually, for most children, only have a minor impact on how that children turns out, right? The child is going to be conditioned by the conditions in which they are, and they only spend part of the time in the household. The rest of the time, they're learning from their peers how to behave and what works and what doesn't work, which is why the social media part is so problematic, right? Because they're learning from social media what's acceptable and what's not. And no amount of parenting is going to tell them, a kid who's learning this, that they shouldn't be learning this, right? You can control the inputs to a certain extent, but only to a certain extent. So then I go on and I think, okay, so what has research and science told us is the main predictor of violence in societal level violence in general? And the main correlate for societal violence is income inequality. It's poverty. If the more, this is the only thing that tracks too, right? The only thing that really correlates with societal violence is income inequality and poverty. The more income inequality there is, the more violent the society is, period. There is no other correlate. So unless we start dealing with the impacts of poverty and income inequality, we're not going to be able to fix this, because that is what science tells us is the correlate. So
Can I rebuttal that? So in the home, and I totally understand, Jennifer, that God gave our kids free will and they're wired in a certain way, and you're right. But if we are attuned to our kids, we can get them help sooner than letting it go far beyond where then it's gotten to a point where we can't. Because you're right. You see kids that are selfish and self-centered, and they don't have empathy. But if you can recognize this sooner, then maybe we can reach out and try and get some resources, because the parent from the very beginning, especially those first 5 years, because we do have more impact, we are more aware. And once they start going to school and we start to see them, as I say, bloom, develop, unfold, because they are now interacting in society. If we are attuned to that, then we can better reach out and get our child the services or the support they need to help with that, because you're absolutely right. It's there. I'm not going to say it's not. It's totally, totally there.
Right. But I look at that and I think, okay, so for parents that are working 3 jobs, their kids are just screwed, right? We're blaming the parent for something that is imposed on the family by society, right? And I think that we need to be very careful about putting all of the weight on the parent, because not all parents have the same resources and access to the same ability to parent, right? So we do need to be careful about that.
Can I just say one thing? I totally agree. I mean, I agree and disagree. So yes, we're putting weight on the parents, but think about this. The subconscious is pretty much formed by the time a kid's 8 years old. Mm-hmm. Children come into this world loving. They love themselves. They love everybody around them. Look at a baby. I've birthed 4 and watched 8 being born. They come into this world full of love, and we take that out of them. And the first place we take it out of them is in the home. And yes, you're right. So many parents who live in poverty don't have the resources to even understand what they're doing. So again, but there's not a blame on the parents. It's just that is a really big part. The foundation of a human being starts with the parents.
Unless they have psychopathy or one of the dark triad personalities.
Mm-hmm. So,
and there's new research to show that can be changed up in the brain. There's really some great scientific research to show that. Anyway.
Okay, Raish?
I suppose just, I think, let's say in conclusion is, I think what's really important for me is, as a therapist as well, to understand the client or the person at their journey, where they're at it's so important to understand the person where they're at in their journey, and to not generalize people, but to understand people for their intersectional differences. We all have different ways of doing things, thinking, behaving, and acting. It's really important that we understand people's intersectional differences. And one of the other things I was going to talk about is disenfranchised grief. I have that issue from being queer, autistic, colored. So I think, the person I was 5 years ago or even 10 years ago is quite a different person to who I'm actually now. So I've had to really work on my journey in terms of confidence building and all those sorts of things. So I think we need to sometimes see things in a very, as I think it was Terry you mentioned, in a very multiplex way. There are all different aspects that co-occur and they intersect and work in conjunction as well. And we need to also work out the primary and secondary losses as well, which often helps us to understand the grief in its entirety, because mental health equates to grief and loss, in my opinion.
Yeah. Very good.
Okay, so Resh, I would like you to break the ice for the next question first. If we have to design the curricula of human mental health education, what should be included in the curricula?
You know something, Munir, I would talk to the young kids themselves. I would reach out to the young people and ask for their feedback. As Karen mentioned, for me, I endorse partnership and working in collaboration, not in isolation. I would reach out to service user, which are those young people, and ask them for feedback on ways to improve things and do things better.
Certainly, human design approach is one of the best ways in order to design any curricula or course so that we can go beyond the boundaries and we can understand what they really want to learn. Any other guests would like to shed light on the same topic? Anyone?
Yeah, I would. Jennifer, you made a fantastic point about education systems needing legislation, needing approval to teach certain things. I've just come back from a trip to Vietnam where I taught over 500 teachers on how to teach mind mapping, a new skill. And I always get resistance. There was a great deal of fear in the audience until I said to them, I'm not going to teach you how to teach differently. I'm giving you a tool to help children. And this tool helps children with stress, for example. At the university, we had exam dogs. And these exam dogs, people would come to the exam, they'd pat the dog before the exam, and it would make them more relaxed. Well, what a lot of rubbish, that didn't help at all. What helps is a student who has a plan, who starts preparing for the exam at the very first lecture. So when they come to the exam, they're prepared, they're confident, and they're relaxed and they don't have stress. So accept new techniques. That's what I would say. Mind maps, for example, is a technique that helps students with learning difficulties, ADHD, dyslexia, because it uses pictures, keywords, which trigger our imagination to think of other keywords and creative ideas. And it's just a tool. So I would say don't be frightened. Accept new techniques. And this is what some of the people that tell our schools what we should be doing and how we should be teaching, perhaps they should look at some of these techniques.
Yes.
So I'd like to follow up on Merrick. I'd like to learn more about your mind mapping thing, because it does seem to track well with what we believe the neocortex actually does, which is make maps, right? And so you're basically hacking into the structure of the brain itself to help facilitate learning. For me, I think what I would like to see included is how does the brain work with like current knowledge of science, and how, more importantly, how does the brain get things wrong? Because the brain thinks it's right when it's wrong all the time. All of our brains do this, right? So how does the brain work? How does the brain get things wrong? How do we recognize and fix when it's wrong? And then the other thing is, how are we conditioned and how do we resist our conditioning? I think would be really, really helpful. I know when I teach people the behavioral science of conditioning and how to resist conditioning, I view this as a basic defensive life skill, right? We're always being conditioned by the people around us, but how do we resist the negative conditioning? How do we even recognize negative conditioning and resist it so that we can be the person we want to be as individuals choosing that? And again, these are two science-based things that I think should just be standard education.
Yeah, Jennifer, you've hit the nail on the head. Cortical skills are such a very important part of intelligence, creative thinking, all of those things, and right and left brain. How do we learn? And unfortunately, we are teaching our students to think and learn in a very poor way. Let me give you an example. When a person reads a word, a child reads a word, and they vocalize every single letter and they make a word, and then they can read a few words to make a sentence. Wow, they're literate. They are literate. Wonderful. And then we stop. And then we don't teach them anymore. It's like saying, well, a baby can crawl from one point to the next point at 6 months. It's mobile, job done. We don't have to teach them how to stand or walk or dance or play football. So we're dropping the ball just a little bit too soon.
Right. And I would say, as someone who's trained in linguistics, the way we teach that, what you just described as the process isn't even how people read. Like, that's not even the skill set, right?
No.
Like, that's not how the brain is doing it at all.
We don't read with our eyes. We don't use our eyes to read. We actually read with our brain.
And it's pattern recognition. It's the letters are recognized because of the pattern of the shape of the word, which is also recognized because of the shape of the sentence, which is also recognized because of the shape of the paragraph, right? Yeah. So it's
I'd just love to share a very quick story because I didn't have my go in the last two questions. So I'm going to share a story with you just very, very quickly. I was in Guangzhou in China, and I was teaching, and before I learned how to speak Chinese, my translator said to me, "You stood up there for 6 hours and you haven't read a single thing. How can you possibly remember all of that?" And I said, "You can do that. It's easy." And she said, no, I can't. I said, "Well, I'm going to give you a word and you tell me what I said." And I said the word bee, as in a flower and a bee and honey. And she said, oh, yes, I remember you mentioned a bee and how a bee works with a flower, and together they make something much more beautiful when they work together. Synergy, they make honey. And I just let her go. And she said, that's how our brain works. The right side of the brain and the left side of the brain, they work together to create something more beautiful. Imagination, creativity, and it's the basis of mind mapping. And I let her talk for 20 minutes and I gave her one key word. Now, for children and adults with learning difficulties, learning a new skill to use a keyword or a picture, dyslexic students, I teach them pictures to tell a story, and it works very, very well. So yes, we need to encourage parents, especially, to start teaching children these new skills, or at least be open to looking at these new skills.
Okay, so yesterday I was going through few ads, and I have selected one of the ads that I'll show you all for. It's about 30 seconds, and then I'll pose one question.
I can't breathe. I have migraines, numbness, weight loss. I live with it every day. The illness that I'm suffering from is an anxiety disorder, and it deserves to be treated like any other illness. But it's not.
The question is very serious. Is mental health an illness, or it should not be taken as illness? The floor is open to you all.
Can I just say I hate the word illness? I'm sorry to say that. I'm very cautious in how I frame things in my classes. So it's not an illness. It might be a challenge that requires support. I think what's lacking in society is we need to start to normalize these sorts of conditions.
Yeah.
It's okay to have these experiences.
Yeah.
I have anxiety attacks all the time. Even right now, I'm highly anxious. And it's okay. It's all right.
Yeah.
Because,
With-
so with my
yeah.
anxiety, it impacts my speech. I become disfluent. That's my autism, right? Like autism, anxiety, disfluency. What a great combination right there. But I think we need to start to normalize these experiences and go, it's okay to be different or divergent.
So true.
Absolutely,
When I
Resh.
watched the same video, I was not agreeing with that, and that's why I wanted you all to give your viewpoints, because it's not mental illness. It's all about we have to empower ourselves to understand it's okay to be not to be
Because
okay.
Right.
that video actually only it actually perpetuates the stigma further.
Yeah.
Yes, I concur with you. Yes, Professor Merrick.
So after
Yes.
I was stalked, and the FBI got involved, and it was like I developed PTSD, right? And I would have 2 or 3 panic attacks a day. So when the first thing she says is, I can't breathe. Holy crap. Yeah. That is, when you have an actual full on panic attack, you think you're dying because you can't get air in your body. Right. And so having access to a mental health professional who understands PTSD, who can teach me the skills I needed to learn how to interrupt a panic attack in process so that I wouldn't die of asphyxiation because I couldn't breathe, was critical to getting my life back, so that I could have a life, right? And it's no different to me. It's seeking this help, this professional help, is no different than, I have a stuck shoulder, or I have, a physical thing going on. I need a professional to help me learn how to fix the problem so I can get my life back and I can start functioning in life again. So, I don't think there should be a stigma for normal kind of how you're wired sort of things, right? That's not an illness. But there are dysfunctions that arise in your body, and your brain is an organ. It does cause dysfunction. How we need professional help to get that, and we need parity in funding so that people have as much access to a professional who can help them with their brain as they have access to professionals that can help them with their body. Because the brain is part of your body. It's not this other thing. It's an organ. It can malfunction just as any other organ or muscle in your body can. So to me, I viewed that as the first thing she said resonated with me strongly as something I've experienced. And then the second thing is, we need resources. We need mental health doctors and, nurses and people that can help, because we don't have enough access, but we also need the fundings for the access so people don't have to treat condition and live with conditions that are fixable versus the things that aren't fixable. Like, how do you fix autism, right? You don't. It's its own thing, right? So what is natural versus what is a dysfunction? Those are real questions. And there's a lot of folk wisdom that treats real, normal things as dysfunction when they're not dysfunction at all. And then we treat dysfunction as if it's normal. And that's what we need to start fixing.
Yes, Terry.
Well, I agree with everyone. It's like lack of resources. We do need good mental health professionals. I had PTSD too after, someone got into my home, held a gun to my head, and sexually assaulted me. And like I said, I was told to just, be silent. And then I moved to San Francisco. I lived in Utah. I moved to San Francisco, where you saw this all over TV and the news. And that didn't happen in Utah. They didn't show it. So I became suicidal. And I said, God, if you can't get me to feeling safe, I'm out. And I connected with a rape crisis, the director of the rape crisis of Contra Costa County. She helped me. She's professional. And then I went on to help others. But there's also things that we can do to help ourselves. And if anybody ever has followed Dr. Joe Dispenza, meditation I mean, we can do this and we can teach people how to do it. I have watched people who are in severe pain be able to sit for 1 hour and meditate. And now Dr. Joe, after all these years of his work, has gathered the data, because I am a data girl. Facts, right? We want to see the facts on what meditation does for the mind, the body, and the spirit, because they're all connected. And we can teach people that. And we should be talking about meditation and these ways to calm the brain down. We should be talking about it in schools. We should be talking about it as this isn't something woo-woo. Dr. Joe wants to see every doctor. If you go in for, I am cancer-free because I learned I meditated and I got my brain in the right way and I stopped living in fear.
Yes.
Yes, Karen.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely the truth. Mental health is health. It's part of health. It doesn't need to be separated. It's a holistic approach. It's not just what goes on with my body because I have other, issues or concerns. It's a holistic approach. And so we really need to treat it as much. And I think there was stigma and no one wanted to talk about it and just deal with it because people didn't know and understand. So we have so much more knowledge and science-based information of understanding how powerful the brain is. And as Terry was saying about meditation, I mean, I'm starting to see in some of the inner schools that they are doing that after school programs. They're teaching kids yoga and meditation, calming, coping. It's coping. It's learning. Look, we're all going to get anxious. Russ says he's anxious just being here. I certainly wouldn't see it because you're doing an amazing job. You're an amazing human being, but it's because you've learned how to cope with it. When we don't teach our kids how to cope with it, and then they go with an instinct, which it leads to the violence, right? So it's that fight, flight, fear, freeze, whatever you want to call it, but that's what it will lead to because we've not taught them how to cope with it. And Terry, just like you were saying, just that meditation and breathing and whatever it is that you do, but we need to have the strategies and teach them from a young age. Look, I'm seeing my grandkids when they start to have their little meltdowns that, their parents are breathing with them, teaching them to breathe and use their words and how are you feeling, and it's just a different approach. And does it take more time? Yeah, it does. But let me tell you, is it worth it? It sure is, so this is how we need to approach mental health and wellness as a holistic approach. It's and as Terry, as you were saying, when you fix your mind, the positivity in your mind and not living in the fear, which can cause the dis-ease, right? Is dis-ease when I am not happy and healthy will cause disease. We find so many people, as Jennifer was saying, living in poverty have so much more disease. Why? Because they live in crisis all the time. Okay. You've got that adrenaline just in living in crisis. You're not the bear's not chasing you where you can get away. You are living with the bear. You can't escape the bear. And this is where you are. And so that causes disease as well. So it needs to be truly a holistic approach. There's so many layers, and everyone here on this panel brought so many amazing insights to this. I just feel so happy to be with all of you.
Professor Merrick?
Just a very quick comment. I believe there is no normal, there's no abnormal. We are just different.
Yeah.
We live with panic attacks. We live with autism. We live with dyslexia. And when we accept that, I think our lives are so much better if we understand that people have panic attacks. And I know many who suffer from that very, very badly. And I appreciate it and I understand it. And I don't see it as a disease at all. We are all different.
Okay, so the last question, Reish, I would like you to start with. Any suggestion which you would like to give to teachers, parents, and young people to support their well-being?
Wow, it's 1:25 in the morning here. My brain's almost turned off. I think for me what's important is ongoing education. And as Karen mentioned as well, we need to talk about these things more openly and transparently with no shame or judgment. We need to normalize these experiences. And, I think I like how Karen, as supposed to summarize it, it's health. It's health. So there's all different pockets of health, and mental health is one of them. Okay, so I think we need to talk about these things, and from a strength-based perspective, not crisis-driven perspective. We have to shift our mindset. When we shift our minds, we also shift the language that we use as well. And that's important to me. Support
Karen?
well-being.
Karen?
Oh, okay. So suggestions is the understanding. I come from the human behavior aspect. And Terry, just like you said, our kids come out, they're pure, they're blank slates. They're already wired with personality disposition. But I really do believe that it's just really starting at home, understanding, building those connections, relationships, and being aware, the education. We are talking about it more now than we ever did before. And there's multiple layers of ways that we can be incorporating this in so many things that we do in our life. But it really starts in that basic formation from home and understanding how our kids are wired. I said this so many times before, how they're wired from birth, becoming aware, adapting our interactions, and applying the right strategies so that we can raise our kids to be who they're meant to be according to their design. There are going to be veins in which we have to adjust and make some adaptations and get additional support services, but we need to have this conversation and be aware. But I truly believe it starts with the cornerstone of understanding our human nature, our personalities and temperaments, why we do what we do. And when needs are not met, we will experience disruptive behaviors.
Absolutely.
I mean, Karen, and that's beautiful. I think that especially that people that live in third world countries, people that don't have the access to this kind of knowledge, Jennifer's 100% right. I mean, so they're living in fight or flight all the time. So how do we get to them and give them some of the tools and the resources to help them become better parents, to change the generational, it's the generational tragedy that just keeps repeating itself. So how do we get that to them and give them some of the simple tools that can really change up how they parent and how they lay the foundation for their children? And then if we can't get to the parents, how do we get to the children? But it is so multifaceted, and we do have to start treating people in their as unique human beings and have empathy and compassion and love for everyone, no matter who they are or where they come from. I'll love you because you look a certain way, but I'm not going to love you or accept you because you look a way that's not comfortable for me. Well, that's fine. We're all connected. We're all connected.
Resh, you were adding something.
Now, I was going to just say as well, as a practitioner, I often tell the parents, help or support your children to befriend their differences. And that's important. When you befriend that, so I've had to befriend my anxiety and depression for a long time. I had internalized ableism, internalized homophobia, and etc. But I've had to learn to befriend my conditions, my divergent self, to fully embrace my authentic being. So I think by befriending those differences makes life a lot more easier for you.
Professor Merrick?
Yeah, difficulties that we have are natural. They are natural. They are a method of survival for us. What Terry said, fight or flight, it's a natural thing. It's our survival that we've learnt over many thousands of years. But to answer the question, how can we support the well-being of our young children? From my perspective, from what I have seen that actually works, is to embrace and try things that may help children with different difficulties. Try things, something will work, and it doesn't fix anything. It just helps them work in a different way that helps them live in our very, very complex lives. And that's what I suggest we do.
Jennifer Hancock?
Sure. So I think the first thing we can do to help people with their well-being is to treat everyone, including people who are acting in a way that we feel maybe acting out. Treat everyone with dignity, because the acting out is a symptom of something else being wrong. And unless we understand that, we'll label people as problem people as opposed to looking at the underlying problem they have as a person. The second thing, I think, as I was listening to everyone, is the serenity prayer, right? Becomes really important. We have to have the courage to change the things we can and the patience to accept the things we can't. But the real thing is knowing the difference between what we can fix and what we can. And it seems to me, like listening to Resh, he was subjected to people trying to fix something that didn't need to be fixed, right? But at the same time, we have a lot of problems that are in fact fixable that we act as if they aren't fixable, right? And so I think using the science, learning what's fixable and what isn't a problem at all, actually, that doesn't need to be fixed, that's where the wisdom comes in. And I think as a parent with my own journey with a child that has multiple overlapping kind of physical disabilities as well as brain issues. The brain is not the problem. That's just the way he's wired, but he does have physical issues that interfere with life. Is learning what for him, what is fixable versus what's not fixable, and helping him work on the things that are fixable while getting him to accept the reality of his brain being different, right? It's not a dysfunction. It's just how he's wired. So what can we change? What do we need to accept? How do we know what the difference is? And I think we need to flip everything upside down because we've had it so wrong throughout history.
So Dr. Lawrence said, and I quote, "Being able to be your true self is one of the strongest components of good mental health." On this note, we end this panel discussion. Thank you, distinguished guests Terry, Karen Wagner, Jennifer Hancock, Resh Ramasamy, and Professor Merrick for making this event a huge success. God bless you all.